Hi, everyone, and welcome to EdPost Conversations. Today, I have with me Bree Dussault, who is Principal and Managing Director at the Center on Reinventing Public Education, better known to us here at EdPost as CERPI. She studies how districts and other public school systems drive innovation and durable change. She also researches how states and districts are creating conditions for effective and equitable AI-enabled learning and AI's potential to reshape the future of learning. Bree previously led the center's national research on how COVID-19 impacted student learning experiences, community access to power, and longstanding systemic inequities. Her work's been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, National Public Radio, and the BBC, among other publications. So first, welcome, Bree, and thank you so much for being here with us today for this conversation. And before we get started on any questions, I just want to open the floor to you to introduce yourself and talk about any of the work that you've been doing recently.
Hi, Lisa. It's so great to be here. And thanks for the chance to weigh in before we dive into the meat of the conversation on AI. I think what I would add, just for folks to know for context, is that right now I'm looking at how AI is being either adopted or explored at a systems level, so within a school system, and what that means for teachers and students on the ground, and also families. And so I think we'll hopefully hit each of those layers, but we've had a chance to study and learn from a number of districts that are innovating in this front. And then we've also had an opportunity at CERPI to convene and hear from national policymakers, advocates, and other types of educator influencers beyond those in the system. So really excited to dive in and see where we can take the conversation today.
Great. Well, again, welcome and thanks for taking the time to talk with me today. When I think about AI and new technologies, I pause for a minute and think back to when ed tech period became a thing in schools. And I was in the classroom then, and I remember some people being very excited about it. I remember some people being not so excited and a little tentative about trying even smart words or some of the applications that were available at the time. So you have different levels of adoption among teachers, different levels of comfort among administrators and schools, and definitely different sets of rules, different sets of guidance and policy that were all over the place. And I remember back to a time when we were afraid of technology. We were afraid of what kids might do with that technology or what they could find, even if they had access, untethered access to the internet. Put a lot of rules in place. We tried to ban a lot of things, from those ed tech things right up to cell phones. And that didn't work well for us. So this time, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like schools have very quickly said, okay, AI is coming and the kids are going to be using it, and we need to figure out how that fits into our space. Is that true?
Yes, what a great framing. I was thinking as you were talking that probably going back to at least as far as the calculator, which now is ubiquitous, we have really been reticent in the education system to quickly adapt any kind of technology. And we often see it as a threat to authentic learning by students. And I think that we actually had a similar initial reaction when ChatGPT, which is one type of AI enabled tool that could impact learning and teachers' jobs. When that came live, within I'd say the first 6 months of that announcement, I think we saw a lot of systems working to ban or control that. And I think that is the nature of how school systems work, which is we're very careful to uptake new innovations. There are pockets of uptake, but systematically, it takes a long time for innovation to transfer from day-to-day life into the classroom. However, I think with AI, what's different is that the technology is both so accessible and evolving so quickly that systems can't ban it. It is present. And so I think we are being pushed more so than with other earlier technologies to have to look this in the face and say, okay, this is here. It's our students have it, our parents have it, our teachers have it. We can't stop that. What do we do with it? And so it's actually, I think, pushing a conversation and questions around policies and approaches much more quickly than other technologies have. And it's also AI has the potential to reshape how work is done and the future workforce in a similar way. I mean, other technologies have that too, but AI really is going to likely do it much more quickly In fact, it already is. So I think the conditions are a little different, and we're going to see we are already seeing systems start to take this on more quickly.
Right. And, with that, in the same vein as that, let's start right off the top with what are some of those safety concerns that you're hearing from either school leaders or teachers or parents about the use of AI in a school space? And what are the potential pitfalls and problems that we could have when we open up this world of AI to kids?
Yeah, great question. Um, so some of the concerns we hear, one is around bias within the tool itself, and again, AI as applied to education it takes form in a lot of different ways. But any kind of AI tool that is relying on a chatbot or a large learning model, that
Mhm.
those tools may have bias because they're pulling from human-based data, and we have bias as humans. So I know that that is a commonly voiced concern. Plagiarism is another commonly voiced concern, and the idea there is that the AI tool may do more work for students they than that should, and it's going to actually be doing the learning for them. I've had a concern of you hear concerns of someone using an AI tool to create an assignment that then a learner uses an AI tool to create, and then you actually just have AI tools talking to each other rather than the humans talking to each other. And so there are some real questions just about what's appropriate for students and adults to be using. At the adult teacher level, there's some concerns around whether teachers' use of it will pull the correct or accurate content if they're prepping materials in the same way that students may pull incorrect information if they're using it. And so I think that these all fall into like kind of one category of concerns, which are just the use of the tool not being a fully reliable measure or way for students to be learning and teachers to be using it for their jobs. A whole other type of concern is actually around equity of access. And so, kind of taking a different angle on this, there's also concern that AI is going to be more prevalent. It's going to become more and more an expectation that students have fluency with it and the ways that AI enabled tools work to be competitive for jobs, and that certain students may get better access to learn that information than others, and that access falls along the typical lines of difference that we see where we see inequities pop up in our system. So that is another conversation. And then I'd say another third thing I've heard is just some questions of who is designing these AI tools and products, and are they really representative fully of the students and adults in our country, and do they bring all of the right perspectives? So those are the general concerns that I tend to hear come up.
Hmm. Right. And the one about I could see that as a former teacher of being very concerned about trying to make a lesson plan or a worksheet or something with an AI tool and then using that thing and then having something that I've missed in there, like an error or something. So I guess, that just speaks to the need for teachers, even when using AI tools, to still, be the human in the room and go through those things to make sure that they're correct.
Yes, like thinking of AI, and I think this is a great example of a skill that we're learning to use AI effectively, which is to think of it right now, at least the iteration we have today, as an assistant and not the full
Mhm.
author of the work.
Right.
And one other element on AI being used to modify or create curriculum is that in some systems, some districts have been really, really thoughtful to adopt high quality instructional materials that have a strong research base and evidence base for effectiveness. And so you hate to see those materials kind of get thrown out with the bathwater in using an AI tool. And so I think that's another consideration for teachers, which is and schools, which is if they know that the materials they have a strong evidence base for being effective with students, still thinking about how to incorporate those materials incorrectly. And many curriculum companies are creating AI assist tools to help as well. But there's also a question of what are you giving up by relying on an external tool, and to just be careful and judicious in those decisions.
Yeah. I know the first concern for teachers seemed to be the plagiarism. We found out really quickly that AI bots can pass some pretty complicated exams. We found out that they could write full papers and kids were taking that and running with it. So we had to train the other bots to know when it came from an AI platform. And I think that's to be expected when we find out that there's a shortcut. Some people are going to go try to take that shortcut and see what happens. And we've tested that. But even on the student end, the inaccuracies that will come up in what they generate, and even a step further, the inaccuracies that are just in photos that are generated. AI is not, it's new. It's not quite there yet. So what we're getting out of it is definitely not perfect and still requires, it's never going to take the place of a teacher in the classroom, and it will never take the place of student thinking and learning. It really needs you to be there with it and using it as a tool, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, we know that as you and I have worked in schools, and I imagine many folks here have as well, we know that relationships are the glue that allow, that create safe and productive learning environments. So that's never going to go away. But figuring out how to wisely use the tools and with the right level of moderation, but also not missing out on opportunities to use them, because they really do offer some advantages and opportunities. And we're just at the beginning. Like you said, the technology is going to keep evolving. And it's wild to think that what we have today, even a year from now, we may consider to be, I don't know, devolved, or that we've moved on past it. That is what is incredible to think about,
I mean, really, it
is
was
how to.
just about a year ago that the things like Jasper and ChatGPT became really big, and people started to talk about them, or the AI photo generators. And there's a marked difference in the way that they worked when they first arrived on the scene and the way that they work today. So
Mhm.
you're right; it's very quickly evolving. I imagine at some point it will be close to perfect, but I never imagine a time when it will be complete perfection. So all of these things to be concerned about, and plus I think some deeper equity issues that we can hop into a little bit later. But these are the things at the top of mind when school administrators are thinking about, what are we going to do here with these bots, and how are we going to address it? When it comes to teachers, what are you finding in schools across the nation? Like, how many teachers have already started to use AI tools, or maybe what percentage of them, and how many are still out there saying, no, thank you, not for me?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that the different surveys yield different specific numbers, but we just completed a survey of teachers with Rand Corporation, and we found about a quarter of teachers report using AI, and found that, and I think that probably makes sense. In fact, from an adoption standpoint, usually when there's any new kind of innovative initiative or product, there's like a fast rush of early adopters, and then it takes a long time for the rest of the users to build in and start to use it. So yeah, teachers are starting to play with it and use it. Students are starting to. What we see is that teachers report using AI most frequently on, I would say, AI enabled tools that have been in place longer. So
Mhm.
the percent of teachers who use, say, Khan Academy is much higher than the percent of teachers who are using Khanmigo, which is the
Mhm.
newer intelligent tutoring product. So, and there have been AI enabled tools in schools, for many, many years before the LLM chatbots came out and really brought this front and
Right.
center. They were not using generative AI in the same way that now we can use generative AI.
Mhm.
So I think that teachers are starting to play with it, but are still in the early stages. And the percent of teachers doing this systematically, I think, will start to differ based on whether they are in schools or in districts that are advancing AI policies and training and support. And so one nuance on the teacher's use of AI is, there's a really big difference if a teacher is on their own looking this up and playing around with it and using it, trying it out in their classroom, than a teacher who is, with their peers being shown tools, given training or supports, or in conversation with each other. You could
Mhm.
imagine that those quote uses of AI are really different in terms of how they impact students, and even in how the teacher is being supported to do that use.
Yeah. So you mentioned training for teachers and PD, and oftentimes districts are a little slow with the training that teachers need, but teachers feel like they need some support with how to use AI technologies in the best way possible to make sure that it is a good, solid tool, not something that's just flashy and new. And they want to know how they can use these tools properly so that they can make their jobs easier instead of adding another layer to their work. So what kind of training do you think districts need to provide? What kind of training are teachers asking for?
Yeah, great question. Uh, one of the interesting things about AI is that unlike most other content areas, we are all coming in at roughly the same level of expertise and learning it. And so whoever would be leading the training at the district level or a school leader at the school level, is learning alongside the teachers.
Mhm.
And so this idea of what I call like AI literacy is
Right.
something certainly needed for teachers, but it's honestly needed top to down. So principals would benefit. We have interviewed superintendents about this. They would like training. They would like to know how to understand how it fits in. And even I would argue school boards and governance
Mhm.
teams would benefit from orientation to what AI is. So getting back to how teachers could be trained, I think the training may look different and that districts are, I think, much more likely to outsource this or bring in experts who have greater background in this. There are a number of different nonprofit organizations and companies that are starting to do this work, Teach AI, AI for Education, AI EDU. There are not enough of them, I think, for the volume of support needed, but we do see districts starting to use specialists to help do that. I think another way that districts and schools could be training teachers is by empowering their early adopters, probably to work in partnership with school leaders or technology leads at the district to lead some workshops. So I think if a system or a school isn't able to like bring in outside experts, they probably have a few experts in house that they could surface and use to kind of virally spread or more systematically spread
Mhm.
know-how. And some training may just be as simple as giving teachers some space and login rights to a tool or a priority platform that the district wants to pilot or try and to let them just have the time to play around with it. I think that for these technology enabled innovations like AI, there need to be many hits and many bites at the apple on it, because I think all of us know you can't just learn a platform in an hour or in one hit.
Right.
So I do think there's something about ongoing repetitive support and opportunities to train on it as well. And I can give one example of a district, Gwinnett County Public Schools in the Atlanta area is actually it's the first district that I've learned of that is rolling out teacher training at the district level. And it's a very large district, 180,000 students, and they have been working for years. They actually started working on AI enabled supports in 2017. So way ahead of the game. It gives you a sense of maybe how long it can take for some of this work to really get solidified, but they do have a learning framework for what AI use could look like for students. It's connected to a portrait of a graduate, their portrait of a graduate, and they now are working to systematically make sure to train teachers in its use. The last thing I'd say around training is everything I just talked about was about using AI enabled tools, a tutoring tool or a grading tool or a chatbot. There also is work to train teachers in how AI is changing skills needed to
Mm.
teach students how to learn. So if and this is kind of this is I think less on the conversation, but we're talking a lot about the tools. We're not talking as much about standards that may need to change or just orientations that may need to change. So you could
Mhm.
imagine now in 2024, if a student needed to write a history paper, how is the teacher going to bring in the reality that the students may go home and use a AI enabled tool to source and write part of that paper? Are they teaching students how to do that in ethical and effective ways? That kind of support of actually how to help students learn AI is another type of training that teachers, I think, would benefit from
Mhm.
because it's definitely happening in classrooms that students have access to AI tools outside of the classroom for their assignments.
Right. Or the early adopters, of course, are the tinkerers. And I used to like to tinker and I still do, but for those people who don't like that or don't have the time to spend learning the platform by yourself, it can be really frustrating. So, like you said, having a peer that can help with that training. That's nothing new. That's been in place for a while. So having your early adopters train on some workshops and be there in the background for some support if that's what's necessary. But taking all the time, and remember, of course, the platforms are evolving with us as we're evolving our skills. So they're changing as we think that we've got it. They're changing along the way. So sometimes teachers just need that encouragement to keep going when they're frustrated and to keep figuring it out. But beyond that, that's the same can be said for students too. Beyond that, are we depending on teachers to come up with all of these clever ideas about how to use them to make their jobs better? Or is there a place out there where teachers can get some suggestions about how they might use ChatGPT or any of the other platforms to help them do their work and reduce the time that they spend planning or preparing materials? How else is this helping them? Like what kind of ideas do they have out there for teachers?
Yeah, I think there are some sites that teachers can go to, and like some of the organizations that I mentioned, like Teach AI just put out a big policy book with many suggestions. I think there's a question of, do teachers know what Teach AI is to know to go
Mhm.
there? They certainly do in places where Teach AI is supporting this. We've seen teachers weighing in social media forums like Reddit, Facebook.
Oh, yes.
So I think that there's an interesting question about what role schools and districts can even play in providing real-time professional development, especially for the early adopters, the tinkerers, when they are really, I think, finding their community and resources with each other now
Right.
nationally and probably even internationally. So that's another just reality. A lot of times the supports become more word of mouth from teacher to teacher.
Mhm.
I think that is probably more likely for the early adopters. I think for the average teacher who, might consider this, it's not a priority. They've got other important priorities. I would imagine that they would be looking for direction from their school leader or their district. And maybe they'd be pointed to a certain tool, and that one tool is what they focus in on, and whatever resources that particular platform provides. So if it's like Conmigo or Magic School, or there are a couple of big popular tools out there right now, that I believe is more likely how the average teacher would be accessing some of this. And honestly, if you can get comfortable enough with like ChatGPT or Claude or one of these tools, I would also imagine that teachers would be querying those tools to say, can you help me learn how to use this? Can you tell me the top 5 applications for teachers?
Yeah.
I think the theme behind all this is that teachers are actually leveraging technology to figure this out. They're not all going to be leveraging a
Mhm.
training that happens from like 3 to
Right.
4 after school with their peers. I think that matters, and they still need that. But the reality is that a lot of this is
Mhm.
probably happening offline.
It's kind of wild what you can ask these chatbots and have them do. Sometimes people say, "Well, put it in ChatGPT," and I say, "It can do that? Really?" And I'll go and try it. I'm like, this is amazing. It's not always perfect. It's not always exactly the way I'd have it. And then you can just keep clicking the refresh button if you don't like it, and it keeps coming up with new ideas for you. And I think, wow, it just blows my mind some days what you can do with AI now and how it can help you reduce your task list. And I'm thinking some of the things I've heard with teachers, they can help with modifications, which is always big a big issue, a source of a lot of work for teachers when they have to modify assignments for either gifted children or for learning support children. So I might be able to help them modify or come up with, say, appropriate test questions to reach a certain objective, to show mastery in a certain objective. Or there are some tools out there that will help them put together a whole PowerPoint, which we know is a big time drag. So that's just 3 examples of ways that you can reduce the time that you spend on the preparation of the materials for your classroom, and haven't even got into some of the ways that teachers can use AI with students in the classroom as a tool, but
Yeah.
lots of potential.
Yes, I think it's actually, and some of the examples you just gave are align with some of the most common ways that teachers in the survey that we put out reported using AI products and tools. I think something really promising about this data we got back is that the top reported ways teachers are using AI are about differentiating and supporting students with learning differences or needs for differentiated products. I think you mentioned a couple of ways that teachers are using those tools. Teachers also reported generating quizzes and assessments, generating lesson plans and assignments. Also, all of those were all the most prevalent uses. And I know I've been on Magic School, and you can even generate like emails to parents on there. You can do a lot of different things. I've also heard from schools that are using tools like Magic AI that at some point once you kind of you learn how to use that program, there are ways to adjust and go back to an LLM like ChatGPT and just use that really as your base. So I think that there's almost an evolution in how people are accessing different kinds of tools as they learn the skills better. But to go back to what I said at the start of this, I think that one of the opportunities that we want to make sure we don't miss with having AI is its potential to help teachers really customize, personalize, and differentiate assignments for students. I think as a former teacher myself, I remember teaching in a classroom where I think I had students with 6 or 7 grade levels difference in one classroom. And it's really challenging when you have 5 classes, all with different students, all at different levels, to create those customized assignments. I think at best what I could do is I could group students and give them roughly the same assignment, or gently differentiated, but it was really challenging. And then you layer in different learning styles, learning differences students may have, and then you layer in different interests and engagement hooks that students may need. It's really
Right.
hard to do that every day as a teacher, constantly in and out.
Mhm.
AI can actually help with that in pretty profound ways. It can help meet students where they're at in terms of their academic need. It can help customize for learning styles, and it can also help customize for areas of interest so that a project might track along and one topic for one student and a totally different topic for another student, but still with the same learning standard. That kind of differentiation, to be able to work with tools to create a base assignment but then customize it, I think that makes me want to go back and teach again. Honestly, it feels
Yeah.
very hopeful um, for what we ask of teachers, solve some of the complexity of that problem if used well.
I think that does sound really exciting, and I would love to try some of those tools. And I think about how much time it used to take to modify an exam, even just down one level or up one level. Once you wrote the entire exam, then you have to go back and start over and start figuring out what are the modifications that the kids need and how can you change the exam so that it fits the learning needs. And boy, did that take forever. So that alone for teachers is just phenomenal. Or another one I've heard is teachers putting the reading materials into ChatGPT or something like it and coming up with those essential questions what are the essential questions the student needs to answer. And it would have made life so much easier if I had a bot to help me do some of those things. So it really is an exciting time, with AI. And at the same time, we're still a little concerned. And you talked about AI literacy, and I love that because we had digital literacy, we had news literacy, media literacy, and now here we are with new technology. So we have AI literacy. And I think it's part of that. It's teaching teachers how to use it the right way, like we've been talking about, to make teaching easier. And the idea would be if we take some of the drag off of teachers with those monotonous things, they have time to work to be better at their craft, right? And so the hope is that teaching becomes more streamlined and a little bit easier so that they can really perfect and hone their teaching as opposed to worrying about creating worksheets and these type of things. The other half of that is what students need to know about AI literacy. So, are there any efforts out there right now to help? I know that I saw that a lot of the policies and different things were focusing more on the teachers than the kids right now. But is there anybody out there right now that's talking about what do we need to teach students in order to teach them to be good users of AI and responsible users of AI and use it for good and not evil?
That is such a good question. And the answer is there's very little out there that I've heard or read about helping students. The best examples I can think of are very specific school systems that made a choice to make AI a priority. And by making AI a priority, they are taking on a responsibility to help their students become more literate in AI. I will say that one of the state policies, North Carolina's policy, outlines pretty clearly different ways that students can and should be literate, and it gives different examples, kind of grade by grade, of how teachers might be able to do that. But it's just a recommendation document. But in terms of what I have been able to see, I will actually go back to Gwinnett County. And again, worth emphasizing that they've been working on this for a long time. So they just have more resources. And hopefully, I know that they're working to make some of these resources available publicly so others can use them. But I think realistically, we may find that districts or schools take more time to uptake this. But what Gwinnett County does is they have a framework. They've created with the state of Georgia a 3-course series on AI, and students can take that. And they've also created an informal framework where they think of all of their students as needing to either be swimmers, snorkelers, or scuba divers with AI. And so they actually have a definition of kind of tiered, almost like we do in like an MTSS, tiered like levels of support. They would be providing different tiered trainings and classes for students who want to go from either just a general AI user and fluent in AI to a student who might want to go into AI as a specific career choice in computer science and engineering. So that, I think, is one really promising example of how a district is doing it. Another district that comes to mind is Mesquite Independent School District, which again, the district took this on. They've developed an AI enabled tool. And that tool, students actually use the tool to provide data on like their well-being, their leadership interests, their career interests, their strengths, and then that data then gets utilized and taken to teachers for to improve like their instruction and their relationship building. But by making this tool, students have had to learn how to use it. So again, that's something kind of coming from the district. One other example, there's a school here in Seattle where I live called Summit Atlas that I know the principal has really taken this on and has brought in different partners like AI for Education. And they have done hackathons with their students, and they're working to make sure that they're getting trained up in tools. So the best examples I can give that I'm aware of are really specific to where a school or a system has said, this is a priority and we're going to do it. What I'm not seeing is, and it may be, I'm not sure, but it may be out there, I just haven't seen it, come up, is like a general site where students can go to get help. And it's from an educational perspective on how to be good learners with AI. It's definitely something needed.
Yeah. And I think about all of the things that when we're real specific with and very intentional about how we train students to use AI, we can avoid those little pitfalls that we talked about at the top of the conversation, like all of the dangers of what kids might get into if this technology is put in front of them and they're free to use it. And we can talk about maybe you don't use a bot to write your paper. Maybe you use the bot to help you strengthen your paper or edit your paper, when you're at that stage of it. And what is considered cheating and what is considered an ethical use? What are the dangers of creating a photo of someone or manipulating a photo of someone? What are the consequences for something like that? And almost have very specific columns of these are the things that it's great to use AI for. And this is how it can help you perform better in school, learn faster. This is how it can help you to become a better reader or a better writer. And these are the things that are going to get you into a lot of trouble. And we want to be really clear about why you don't use AI for these things, and with really clear reasons behind it and specific for them. Like this is potentially a crime and this is why. And let kids truly understand that we're not just trying to, take the freedom of the tool away from them, but say that these are the ways that you should not be using this. And we're now going to trust you to do this the right way. And I think it's a very mature way to treat the kids like we would any adult when we told them, the pros and cons of using a tool, and give them that right at the start. And get rid of some of those discipline problems that may pop up along the way.
Yes, I think what you're speaking to of proactively working with students is so important. And we have this window of opportunity right now while AI is pretty new. And I think we have an obligation, especially to our older students who are going to be entering college or career and going into jobs without, like, the majority of their K-12 schooling will not have had AI in it, but they are going to be expected to learn it. So I'm like, the kind of this current high school generation is really on my mind. I think we have
Right.
an obligation to them. But one of the, going back to that, your first question of some of the risks from an equity perspective, what we're seeing is also in a survey we put out to districts with RAND, is that the districts that are more likely to provide professional development and policies on AI to help guide use are more likely to be suburban and higher income districts. And so we're already seeing differences in who is being proactive and at least creating some conditions that we can start to measure for that, where you might imagine students would get what you just described, like the checklist of how to navigate this or not. And so for those students, I think it's quite possible that they will be more equipped to use this responsibly and also just effectively for their whole lives, not just in school, but like, how do you do this in jobs? So how do you do this if you're going on to college? So that, I think, is a real question. And to be fair, it's hard. I think a lot of districts and schools have a lot of priorities. We're still trying to address chronic absenteeism, pandemic learning loss, mental health issues. And so AI can feel like an add-on or a nice to have. I actually think, though, that AI and being literate in AI is fundamental to those other priorities if used correctly. So there is an opportunity now for school leaders and teachers and systems to proactively work on this. And I really think that their students would benefit from it in ways that we may not fully get today, but we will understand in years to come.
Right. And as you were talking there, you mentioned about the districts that are advantaged economically are the first out the door, with training and with different programs to address AI. And that does not surprise me, but it brings up some equity points. And so when we're talking about AI and equity, and we've dropped a few of them along the way, but what are the things that teachers and school leaders need to be aware of, to look out for when implementing AI in classrooms and schools? What should be on top of their mind as a potential equity issue for kids?
Yeah, it's an essential question. Otherwise, AI has the potential to, like, strengthen the chasm of differences that we can kind of
Hmm.
predict due to the ways that our systemic inequities present themselves
Right.
in education. So it feels very urgent to me because AI is going to exacerbate whatever conditions it's in. So I think that, one big equity question is the one I just raised, which is just being proactive, just systematically providing support to teachers and at the district level to principals to be oriented to basic AI literacy, to be literate themselves, and to be able to help their students be literate. Um, that feels very important, so that students more systematically get access. If you take it out systematically so that it's reactive, you end up finding students in higher wealth districts are going to get access sooner because they have the capacity to do that sooner.
Hmm.
Um, that's number one. I think number two would be making sure that students have access to whatever, just the actual access to AI tools. Students and adults should be able to access this, but there are subscription fees for almost all of the products. And so I think that, and it's a hard question for districts, especially right now, because we're losing federal funds through the ESSER fund kind of window closeout right now. So I think it's a hard question, but I think any system needs to make sure that students have, access to a Chromebook or a laptop. And if there are subscription fees for critical tools, that they consider providing those. There also may be some work around supporting parents in AI literacy, and that's a top. We haven't gotten deep into the role that parents can play, but you can imagine going home, no matter what your school does, and if your parent is using a tool or is literate, they're going to help you out too. And also, I think that parents, I would need to be brought along and be a part of the conversation. I also think that you can imagine a parent being nervous about their student using AI if they don't know what it is at all. So parent literacy is another really important equity question, making sure that parents who may not have access to AI tools at least can get exposure, ideally through the school. I know it's asking a lot from the schools. We ask a lot of schools, but I think in an ideal situation, that would be great. And then maybe a fourth area of equity is from an opportunity cost perspective, acknowledging that there are some emerging AI tools. There's nothing as like evidence-based or research-backed. It's too soon, but there really are some tools that can help teachers meet students' needs better. There are even some tools that can like translate documents so that if you have if you're a teacher in a classroom where you have multilingual learners with more than one, two, three languages spoken, which is very common in some districts, that you have some tools to just translate your material. There's some really basic things to some more sophisticated tools. And I think from an equity perspective, if districts aren't looking into some of these tools that have promise for differentiating assignments, especially for students who are traditionally or marginalized in the system, then they're passing up on an opportunity to help serve them better. So those are some of the things that I think come to mind. Maybe a fifth one that comes to mind is just really working to make sure that more students, who are going into tracks of courses where they may be contributing to the AI field, like engineering and computer science, that the students going into those courses represent the diversity of the district they're in or the community they're in. We also don't see great representation in a lot of the career pathways that lead into AI, actual engineering. So schools have a role to play in helping seed the future AI technicians and ideators with more representative students.
Right. So trying to figure out how that happens, right? And trying to figure out, what is it that we need to teach and what is it that we need to offer kids who have that interest so that we can push them into that, in that direction, in the right direction they want to go toward their interest, right? And, it's great to hear that schools aren't fighting against AI because, what is true is that AI is coming. We are all using it now, and 100% the kids that are in schools now, like high schools and middle schools now, they'll absolutely be using it in their fields of work. So it almost is a responsibility of the schools at this point, not only to figure out how to nurture that interest, but to provide some training around AI, because a life skill of the kids that are in schools now is going to require use of AI in some way, shape, or form.
Indeed.
And yeah, with that, it's been difficult for schools to provide guidance around AI. And there are two particular schools that were noted, Oregon and California. Is there anything that those two schools have done that really stand out to you, or anything that we should be watching as other states start to try to piece together some guidance for their schools and teachers around AI?
Yeah, great question. So we're now at 9 states have provided guidance, and Oregon and California were the first out the gate. And something we're seeing with the states is, one is it's tentative, it's recommendations and guidance. And I think that's a natural reflection of the fact that states, like everyone else, are learning how to use AI and how to even know how to define the problem to solve for, just like the rest of us are. Those that have put out guidance, they seem to cover some common areas like acceptable use, student data privacy, and protecting student data is a really important
Right.
area of policy setting, some of which is taken care of federally, but there is guidance or recommendations for how schools can be following appropriate use guidelines. They also tend to touch on, many of them touch on the ideas of bias and potential risks of AI. They touch on the fact that AI is not a replacement for teachers. Many of the policies use the term human-centered AI approaches. So I think that they're trying to make a very clear stance that AI is supportive, not replacing. And some of them are addressing this idea of plagiarism as well. And some are suggesting some potential policy language that districts could be using to set up. And then there are little one-off things from state to state. I think the plagiarism conversation is interesting because we're seeing different takes on that. And so, for example, West Virginia's policy is pretty traditional. Like it says to report examples of students using an AI tool to plagiarize. So it kind of just fits AI into the current understanding of plagiarism. North Carolina's policy actually says that teachers should rethink plagiarism in the age of AI. So they actually are suggesting a mindset shift. They propose a red, yellow, green stoplight structure for identifying assignments that where use of AI may differ. So some assignments may not require any AI, and therefore using it would be a violation. But then there are other assignments that are green where it's absolutely encouraged and it would be a part of the assignment. So I think it's interesting to see states are kind of moving into different stances right now. And they are also very clear that the recommendation documents are guidance. Some of them even track how how frequently they're updating the documents, and I think that's actually a great strategy because it models the reality that we are literally learning as we go. But you can imagine being in a state with one set of guidance getting different training than being in another state with a different set of guidance, and then versus being in a state with no guidance where you're getting nothing. So I
Right.
think we may start to see, just continued differences and maybe even some fragmentation of how well educators and principals are supported in this and
Right.
even what they're encouraged to do as states come out with this. And again, it's just this question for states of how much is this a priority? I think a lot of states that are prioritizing this are doing so because they are in a state where technology is an industry that they feel obligated to or they want to grow. And so they are also coming at this from a kind of proactive, empowered place of we want we want our students to be the country's best AI engineers, software developers, security workers. So they have an identity around this too. So I think that's kind of interesting to see the differences and that deeper layer of support that, a teacher may not know their state policy, but it really does ripple into the classroom eventually.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's quite a task when you're in the wild, wild west of AI and you're trying to write this policy for people when it just keeps changing. And I can see why some districts might be slow to try because it seems like a Sisyphean task, like rolling the rock up the hill just to have it come back down and start over. But I do appreciate North Carolina's take on it, the mindset shift. It's like when we have these tools and people are using them every day, what is plagiarism? And I remember asking these questions when kids were using cell phones and like different things like that in the classroom, where you ask yourself, when I'm in my regular day and regular job, how often do I look something up on a cell phone to check, or how often do I use this calculator or this tool? And should we really be expecting that kids can do everything by hand with a pencil? Or should we teach them how to use the tools well that they have that we know we already use every day? And so the mindset shift is an interesting one, especially around plagiarism, because we've been pretty hardline on what that is for most of education history. So it's really super interesting. There's so much that we could continue to talk about probably for another hour, I think. But if we get all this right, if we get the guidance in place, if we get the policies in place for school and the training and the resources and have the technology available and the teachers are trained and they know exactly how to make teaching better and the students are good citizens and we are successful, what does learning look like for kids?
hmm I'm so glad you asked this question because I think it's easy to stay where we're at, which is around efficiency improvements in our work, and I would even say like learning efficiencies for students. And there's a lot of opportunity there, but I think there is an opportunity to actually innovate and reimagine what learning can look like. And this to me is one of the most exciting areas of exploration because AI, even though the tools evolving so much that whatever I say today is, we really don't know what's going to be possible. But um, AI coupled with just the fact that almost everyone has a Chromebook or a computer now and can do
Mhm.
different types of place-based learning. I could imagine learning looking different. I could imagine school looking different. Like I could imagine classrooms not having to be one teacher to 30 students or in a particular building. I
Mm.
could see schooling actually start to shape to the developmental needs of students so that what it means to be an elementary student looks pretty different than what it means to be a high school student. Um, apart from the like colors and the carpets in class, a first grader, their experience isn't that different than a 10th grader. They're still
Right.
sitting in a room with a teacher at a desk with books. And so I think that that's what's really exciting is because of this ability to radically personalize and give access to almost infinite knowledge or information, not knowledge, infinite information, you really could see schools shifting. I think that the potential for high school, for example, to shift to meet some of the developmental needs that we know adolescents need. They often
Hmm.
report wanting to be more out in the field, doing internships, working on the ground, working in different hours, maybe not having to wake up at 7 a.m. when their biological clock tells them they need to. You could imagine that the walls of the school go away and it starts looking differently. You could also imagine the teacher role changing. You could
Hmm.
imagine teams of teachers working together in more multidisciplinary ways. That's one thing that I meant to bring up, but I think that signs are pointing to the need for and the ability to do more multidisciplinary content delivery and not having to just be a content specialist. So you can imagine teachers working together more cohesively because they have tools to communicate in ways that we just can't do it right now. And again, going back to like, I would be excited if I knew I went to school every day and I worked with a team of people and not
Right.
just alone in my classroom. So I really think that if done well, schooling could look quite different. One last thing, I think we could also bring parents in different ways
Hmm.
because there's such opportunity to both communicate and personalize with AI, and that's just using today's technology, today's version of AI.
We definitely want to bring parents into the conversation to, ease their fears about this technology and about the safety of their own kids, and also to help them learn alongside their kids too, and to help them be able to provide the support that kids might need. So always an important player and a stakeholder in the education. And especially when education starts to look a little different, it seems to me that parents will have maybe even a greater role in that education conversation than they do today, as
Yeah.
things start to change. It really
Mhm.
sounds exciting about where we could go with AI in education to have the role of the teacher look different and to have student learning look different, which I think is something people have been asking for a long time.
Yeah. Maybe we finally move into the 21st century with our schools and the work as a teacher.
Since I'm not there anymore to see it happening, it's so great to hear about what schools are doing with these new tools, and really refreshing to see that they're not as tentative as they once were about accepting the new technologies and running with them and imagining the big 10,000-foot view of like what could possibly happen with this and how can we use it to get there. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you'd like to talk about before we end for the day?
I think we've covered a lot of ground. I think I would just emphasize again the potential for tools to really support historically marginalized learners in new ways, and also the potential for AI to bring parents into the conversation in new ways. It really has the potential to be a right sizing force if utilized correctly. It also has the potential to not do that if not utilized well, but the opportunity is really exciting ahead of us.
Earlier on, you talked about how schools, when they have the resources, are charging ahead with AI, and there's an equity issue about both access to technology and other things. The opportunity cost. What do we stop doing because we start doing this and those type of things? And it has the potential to grow the divide between areas of difference in kids and families and communities. If done well, does the use of AI in learning also have the potential to shrink that divide, and could help us become more equitable and more fair across learning?
I think that yes, that I think is the hope. I mean, we are so early in, it's hard to know how powerful this tool can be, but I think all of us who work in the public education space that I know are here because we want to see all students moving into healthy, happy, empowered lives. And we know that systematically that's not happening. And I think it's because it's a really complex problem with a lot of factors behind it. And AI is not going to solve all of the problems, but it is going to make it easier for educators to do their jobs in ways that meet students' needs where they are. And sometimes I wonder if such a complicated problem requires a complicated technologically enabled solution for solving it. I think we'll see, and this gets into that idea that if we're not using AI, then we may be missing out on a huge opportunity to solve some of these complex problems that we face.
I think that's the most exciting thing yet, that this could really move us forward in solving some of these big thorny problems that we haven't been able to get to the bottom of yet. Well, thank you again so much for being here today. I have kept you way over the time I should have at this point, but it's a really exciting topic. So, I hope you'll come back to talk with us again in the future. And for everyone else, if you're interested in conversations like these, please do like and subscribe and share with your friends, and come on back for another EdPost conversation.
Thank you so much.